the overall, from an Agile coaching perspective, when we say coaching, we're talking about professional coaching, things like powerful questions, feedback techniques, which we'll be talking about today, emotional intelligence, active listening and presence. And a lot of coaching in general comes from a very famous book called Coactive Coaching, which I very highly recommend. And some of the other areas, of course, are mentoring, teaching, and facilitation. All right. So one of the points I want to make specifically before we get too much further this week on coaching is an experience that I had recently with coaching at a coaching retreat. So we broke up into triads and we did the coach, coachee, and silent observer. And there was one person that was sort of newer to this, and we were using a technique that I created called silent coaching, where you use a card deck and you pick a card to go through the various pieces of a coaching arc. And you might start out with, how are you today? And you might move to what's on your mind. Then you might say something like, what kind of options are you thinking about here? And then all the way to what step will you take next and when will you do it? And so we were doing this, and this one participant that was new to it was using the cards, and I was her coachee, and she had got me to the point of she had pulled out from me just using cards. She didn't speak. She just showed me the card. She had pulled out 4 options from me that I was not aware of that came out of the coaching process. And then she started talking and asking, what about this and what about that, and trying to come up with other options. And in the end, when we debriefed, I asked her, I said, why did you break out of using the cards? And you had pulled 4 options out of me, and it was for a real situation. I actually followed up on it later. It was very useful. Why did you do that? And she said, well, I felt like I hadn't added any value. And so that to me was a reminder that the coaching process itself has value. To me, I felt like I'd made a breakthrough in that particular issue, and she was, just using the cards. Now, the value that she was adding there was following the process, choosing cards based on what I said wisely, and I get a lot of value. So I reassured her, no, that was extremely valuable to me, and I felt like, the stuff that you were adding in at that time wasn't necessary. I had already felt like you'd help me figure out my problem. So that's something I want to talk about here, is just remember that as a coach, your knowledge of having a coaching process, following it, and until you get to the point of, the person actually needs some advice, not giving advice, holding your opinion back, is actually extremely valuable. So just wanted to bring that out as a reminder. All right, so let's talk about giving and receiving feedback. Now, I'm sure that all of you have been in a position where you've either had to give feedback or receive feedback, and that's not always pleasant, right? So I'm going to give you an example here. But one of the reasons that I think feedback can be so hard is, especially on the receiving end, is you may look at somebody frowning and you're like, oh, I'm giving you gold here, and you're frowning at me. But the thing is, the information you're giving them may seem wrong, not make sense to them, or they're not really sure how to react or how to integrate that information, or they may actually be aware that some folks, feel that way, but they don't agree. Like, no, I'm not changing that, right? So that can make feedback difficult. But let's look at a particular simple case, and I'm doing this sort of as just an example, and it may seem a little obvious, but this is just to set the background. So this is a real case. So one day I made a mistake in buttoning up my shirt, and I walked out the door, went to work, and I hadn't looked in the mirror after I buttoned up my shirt. So it was very embarrassing. I don't know that you've ever done this, but I did. So somebody said, hey, you might want to go look in the mirror. And I'm thinking, oh, maybe I've got something on my face or whatever, but oh, my shirt's unbuttoned. So there's a couple things about this that are pertinent to both feedback and advice. In both cases with feedback and advice, generally the feedback or advice is necessary because there's some kind of knowledge gap. So in my case with the shirt, the knowledge gap was, I didn't know my shirt was misbuttoned. The next part is an observation. Your shirt is not buttoned properly, all right? And what's the impact? They didn't need to tell me it was pretty clear to me I was looking unprofessional, right? So people aren't going to take me seriously. They're going to be focused on the button, whatever. So what's the potential next steps? Well, rebutton the shirt properly, right? So that's pretty straightforward. But these four things are the general underpinnings of advice and feedback in general. So there's one way to look at it. It's not the only way to look at it, but I found this to be very useful. Now that observation, this is actually a good observation. Observations can be quite poor. Like somebody might say to me, boy, you just don't want to be here today, huh? You're looking pretty unprofessional. And now I'm thinking, wow, I really don't want to hang out with that person. But when somebody says, hey, look in the mirror, or your shirt's not buttoned properly, they're just stating the facts. They're not making a judgment. They're not, insulting me. They're just giving me information that I can use. And sometimes we forget to do that. So let's look at another example. Same thing, but maybe a little bit more specific to us. So a manager comes up to you and says, I thought the whole idea of Agile was that the team would make more decisions on their own, but they still ask my opinion on decisions that I think they should make on their own. Do you have any advice? So let's assume, you've gone through a whole coaching conversation. Let's look at what's going on here. So we've got a knowledge gap, an observation we can make, impact, potential next steps, right? So it's pretty clear here the manager can't see that they're continuing to countermand actually many of the decisions that the team tries to make on its own. Now, that wasn't in the story, so I'm sharing this with you. So an observation you can say, to give that person, right? Not a judgment call like, wow, are you micromanaging, but just, hey, well, last week the team decided to do a release, but you didn't think that the customer wanted a new release, so they didn't release. The impact was right after that happened, they're going to make another decision, but one team member piped up and said, I'm thinking maybe we should ask, our manager what to do before we make that decision. So it sort of reinforced while you're saying you want them to make more decisions, you're reinforcing the idea that actually you don't trust them yet. So one thing to consider is let them make more decisions, even if it wasn't what you would do, unless you think that decision would create a major problem. So like, think of it as skinning their knees versus going to ER. If you think they're going to go to the ER, okay, say something. If you think they might just skin their knee, hey, maybe they will, maybe they won't. Maybe they'll surprise you. But thinking about what's the knowledge gap, what's an observation I can make that's non-judgmental, what's the impact of the behavior, and what are some potential next steps? That's a way to frame thinking about feedback and advice. So a little bit more here, make the observation specific and measurable, focus on what actually transpired, try to stay away from things like should or judgmental things. Don't be judgmental, be neutral. So instead of something like, I didn't like your style, say something like, you spoke too fast for me. I wasn't able to, pay attention, and you seemed upset. So very, very specific, and try to avoid speculating on intentions. So somebody showed up late, instead of saying, I know you don't want to be here, say, I noticed you showed up late. Some of these things may seem, pretty straightforward or obvious, but for me, I think having this framework to think about it makes it easier when I'm heading into a situation where I'm going to give somebody feedback or I'm going to receive feedback, for me to think about, how could I cross the T's and dot the I's here? Am I being specific? Am I judging? And sometimes you get caught up emotionally, right? Like, oh, that person clearly doesn't want to be here. Well, maybe so, maybe not. And we're going to do a demo in a moment here with Brian. I guess we're going to do the demo right now. All right. So Brian, let's see. We had two examples, and in this first example, I am going to be a job candidate, and you're trying to place me somewhere. And I've just called you up, and I say to you, "Hey, Brian, how did things go with the client?"
Yeah, Damon, I wanted to give you some feedback. It appears that you weren't able to speak to a couple of things on your resume. I really can't move forward with somebody that lies about things on their resume, and it's pretty clear to me that you were lying to try to get this job, really just not qualified for it, and it's really hard for me to move forward to you as a candidate at anywhere moving forward at any of my other clients.
Let me just stop you right there, Brian. Whatever. Oh, goodbye.
Yeah, bye.
So, that was an example of it not going so well. And so we've chosen a couple of examples here with some extremes just to illustrate some of the points. So yeah, he called me a liar, right? He didn't give me information about what exactly happened, and I got ticked off, and I'm out of there. Now it may be true that I was lying, but let's rewind the tape and let's try it again. So hey Brian, how did things go with the client?
Hey, Damon, glad you called for some feedback. It appears that you had a little bit of trouble speaking to some of the things on your resume. Has it been a little bit of time since you've touched that technology, or um, what happened there?
Oh yeah, I remember that. So they were asking me some questions about some things that were further down on my resume that were a while ago. I didn't expect that, and now that you mention it, I guess that could be seen as misrepresenting. So maybe I should just take that off because that was longer ago, and if that's really what they're interested in, I might not be the right candidate there. So. Hey, so maybe we can go on and talk about other stuff and follow up on how I could make the resume better there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great idea.
All right. So exact same situation, and just by moving to being very specific and observing and not judging, it turns out that the other person receiving the feedback already sort of had a view into, hey, something didn't go right there. And we're making this sort of a caricature, but to highlight some of these different things. Now, on the other end, receiving feedback, I don't know about you, but when I get feedback, especially if it was like that first example, I cringe sometimes, and I'm like, oh no, I'm actually awesome, and you whatever, that's your perspective. But the thing about it is, actually, all feedback is useful feedback. And if you can engage in a conversation, you'd be like, well, let's back up a minute. Let's talk about this topic. That can be a lot more useful. And you can use a lot of the feedback guidelines in the other direction. So, if you were that client, if you were the applicant there, and somebody said you lied, you could say, well, I'm sorry, you feel that way. Can you give me something more specific, right? So look at it as an opportunity. Like there's something there. Dig in a little bit. And if the person just doesn't want to give it to you, well, at least you tried. And I also want to tell a story. So we're going to do one more demo, but I want to tell a story about something that I ran into in the workshop, which was many years ago when first using a technique with giving people awards through all these different awards and coaching, facilitating, time management, holding back, what have you, things that were sort of focused on coaching skills. And midway through the first day, folks were giving out awards left and right and really enjoying it. And it was the first time I'd done it, and I was like, oh, this is really great. And then this one person raised their hand. Now, I'd noticed that this person had talked about, in the past, they had talked about how great they were at time management. And so they were very proud of that. And they raised their hand and they said, Damon, I have a suggestion for you. And I said, oh, what's the suggestion? And they said, I think you should drop the time management award. And I said, oh, why is that? And they said, well, because I didn't get any. And I was like, okay. So I just blithely pushed forward, not realizing where this was going to end out. But it makes for a good story now. And I said, all right, everybody else, everybody raise your hand if you gave out a time management award. And everybody in the class raised their hand. It was just that he hadn't gotten one. So the moral of the story there is that one way to get feedback is to look at all the places where you're getting information and think about, where am I not getting information that I think I should be, right? So it can kind of guide you there. Or if you're getting all kinds of negative feedback on something that doesn't make sense to you, see if you can find somebody that you trust to help you navigate that. So let's do one more demo. And in this case, Brian is going to be the person in trouble here. So Brian, take it away.
Yeah, so Damon, you mentioned you wanted to speak with me about something.
Yeah, I did. It seems like you really don't want to be part of this team. You keep showing up to the as an example, you keep like screwing up the stand-ups, and you're really disruptive. And I just I just wonder if you even want to be on this team.
Yeah, it's been something that I just the team is really difficult for me, and maybe I'll look into just joining another team then, I guess.
All right, fine. Well, that's I'm glad to see that we're on the same page there.
Yeah, me too. Finally.
Well, I don't know about you, but I just felt like, wow, I didn't want to be in that room. Um, so, I just, in that case, I was kind of the scrum master. So you might be like, all right, that scrum master needs to be fired. Yeah, Damon, the evil scrum master there. So let's rewind the tape, and let's say that we've, taken this feedback stuff to heart, and let's give it another shot.
Yeah. So Damon, you said you wanted to speak with me about something after the meeting.
Yeah. So until recently, you've been showing up at the stand-ups. You're like the first one, but in the last couple of weeks, I don't know, maybe a month even, you've been showing up to the stand-up late or not even showing up. What's going on?
Yeah, I'm really sorry about that. I know that we, had a team agreement, and I know how important that is to making everybody, work in the organization together. It's just that I've been put onto a new project, and I've asked the senior leadership to take me out of that, but there's conflicting meetings, and I'm having a really hard time getting here. If we could maybe move the meeting back a couple of minutes, it would really help me to be here on time.
Okay. Well, moving the meeting would require everybody being on the same page there, but I know people would love to resolve this, and we have our retrospective coming up, so that'll be a good time to bring that up. All right. Well, thanks for sharing that with me. I didn't realize that, and I'm glad we had the discussion.
Yeah, thanks for bringing it up and giving me a time to do that. I've just been busy. I meant to bring it up myself, and I forgot.
I wonder, I don't know at what point the chat came up, but somebody in the chat wrote, I resemble that remark. Maybe they could clarify that, because I don't know what the timing was, or maybe they don't want to. Okay, so let's keep going here. So that was feedback. Hopefully you got something out of that, and we're going to move on to AdCar. So when I first discovered AdCar, I thought, hey, that's really interesting. I don't really know how to use it. There's not a lot out there that's really sort of specific and practical and obvious. So, but then, I kept thinking about it. I kept coming back and kept recognizing opportunities to use it. So here's sort of part of my take on AdCar. Now, there's Cotter, there's AdCar, there's, all kinds of change models out there. Fearless change, and what have you. But today we just want to talk about AdCar. AdCar is known as an individual change management method, and I think while it works well with individuals, a lot of the time as an Agile coach, we're actually working with teams, and I think it's actually very useful to use in general with teams. So I'll talk a little bit about it and some ways to use it. So what is AdCar? AdCar is awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. And I think in the case of ability and reinforcement, they aren't named all that well, but sometimes with these acronyms, you just need to have something that makes sense, although AdCar doesn't actually spell anything out. But like in the case of invest, the N negotiable, that's really troublesome, but without it being an N, it wouldn't be invest, and it wouldn't be as useful. But anyway, so awareness is just a really straightforward thing. So the firemen in this case are pretty aware that there's a problem with the building. The guy there from oh my gosh, can't even remember the show now. He seems pretty unaware. You got the kid there, super excited, a lot of desire to do whatever with those glasses. Cat is kind of done with coding, isn't even really looking at the keyboard correctly. Knowledge, Einstein, enough said. Homer Simpson, I think he knows where the local pub and donut place or the Quickie Mart is, but that's about it. Superman, a lot of ability. Three Stooges, not so much. So reinforcement, what does that really mean? Reinforcement is the idea of support, and I think that's better, right? So you get the cheerleaders, they're throwing fellow cheerleaders up in the air, and then they're going to catch them, right? So they're there, they're very confident about going up in the air because they know that their friends are going to catch them. Wile E. Coyote, kind of in trouble, right? He's just going to fall. So that's not so great. So why, let me take us through this, and I can better explain why I don't particularly like the labels ability and reinforcement, but why they're so important. So I was once asked to go and talk to a coach at a client, and they said, hey, you need to come in and talk to your coach. We got a problem. I said, what's the problem? They said, just come in. I was like, oh, okay. So I went into the client, went to a conference with our coach, and I said, hey, I understand there's some trouble. What's going on? And he slammed his fist into the table, bam, and said, they're just not seeing it. And I was like, I think I have discovered the problem. So that was an awareness issue. He was not aware, but the client was not aware of the point that he was trying to make. He was trying to make the point that they were, blowing literally millions of dollars by putting out release after release that had preventable bugs in it, and the rollback and all that kind of stuff. So he was aware of the fact that they had a problem. From their perspective, they didn't see it as a problem. That wasn't their money. It's the company's money, and that was just SOP, standard operating procedure. As far as desire, there wasn't a lot of desire to change it. And while he was saying we got to talk about continuous integration and refactoring and unit tests, they didn't have that knowledge. And so therefore they didn't have that ability. So I think ability is better stated as experience, right? There's a lot of things that we may not have the experience to do right now, but if we learn it, we get the knowledge, we get the support we need, then we're going to have that ability or experience. Right? So I like that better as experience, but ADKAR is ADKAR. Reinforcement, that sounds a little draconian, like thou shalt. But really what it means is support. So let's say the team eventually becomes aware that, yes, as a company, we are losing a lot of money, and management says, hey, we want to do something about that. And now there's more of a desire, but there's not that much knowledge. And so they're not going to have the ability, right? So if they head down that path, they're going to fail. So the coach says, all right, well, we can spend some time on this. We can do some practice. We can set up a continuous integration environment. When we've got some new code, we can put it in there. We can do some refactoring and unit tests with new code. We get used to it, and then we'll move to going back and working on some of the legacy code now that we have a little bit more confidence. So then the team might go to the manager and say, we want to head down this path. We think it's going to be really useful, and it's going to help you out, and it's going to save money. But our velocity as we learn this is going to go down for 4 iterations. And let's say the iterations are 2 weeks each. So the manager comes back and says, whoa, I don't know if we can do 4 iterations, but I'll tell you what, I'll give you some license and some leeway and air cover. I'll tell the stakeholders, hey, we're going to be a little slower for a while for 2 iterations. Let's do 2 iterations, make some progress, see how things go, and then let's talk about it again. So now that change has reinforcement and support so that it's more likely to succeed. So that's the idea. As a coach, pushing on things that people aren't aware of isn't going to help. As a coach, you can see things that they don't see. So you want to build that awareness so that they may have the desire, or you could be doing lunch and learns or whatever to provide the knowledge. Then if there's a change that's going to require some support, reinforcement, let's get that before we make the change. So that's how I see applying ADKAR. And then more broadly, if you look at this more broadly, you can think of yourself as an information radiator. So you're not saying, oh, wouldn't it be a good idea? You're just, maybe doing a lunch and learn or whatever, and talking about continuous integration, or talking about refactoring, or talking about changing the stand-up, or new retrospective techniques. You're just radiating information. So you're increasing awareness, perhaps building desire, increasing knowledge, and of course the ability and reinforcement aren't going to come till later. But if you don't have awareness, desire, and knowledge on stuff, then the ability and reinforcement don't matter, because no matter how hard you push on that, people aren't going to want to do it. So from the things that people are aware of, desire, knowledge, and you're going to get the reinforcement to potentially build that ability, you can put that into your backlog of potential actions. And the thing is, as a coach, that shouldn't be your choice. It should be the coachee's choice, because if they choose it, they're going to be more behind the thing. This is what I wanted to do. Hey, Phil, hey, Jerry, hey, whoever, can you be there with me and help us through this thing that we've chosen to do? Well, absolutely. All right. So another way to look at that top level there are the ways you can radiate are to say, here's what I've observed. You can have opt-in learning events. You can do the coaching, teaching, facilitating, and mentoring kind of things. Published offerings, the idea there, that's on my blog, damonpool.blogspot.com, about, what does an Agile coach do every day? So publishing, what are your service offerings? So for me, for example, I can do a Scrum class, I can do a Kanban class, I can do a user story workshop. What are the things that I can do that you may or may not know about, may or may not have thought to ask me for? So these are things that you can radiate. And then from that, build awareness, desire, knowledge, create the backlog, and then some of those things they're going to be able to do on their own. Some you'll be there to assist. So that's basically the idea with ADKAR. Self-retrospective. So I don't know about you, but sometimes after a coaching interaction, I'm like, I have this feeling that could have gone better. So what can we do? So something that I found to be really useful is to just frame that coaching interaction. So I'll give you a couple examples. Frame that coaching interaction and then look at it objectively. How did it play out? What did I do? What could I have done differently? So I'll give you one example. I was on an engagement recently up in Vermont, and I was driving home, and I thought there's something not quite right about the conversation I just had. What was it? So the framework that I like to use is to just basically describe in a couple of sentences what were the circumstances, and then what action did I take, and try to match it up with the mode. Was it coaching, facilitating, teaching, mentoring, or did I actually, horror of horrors, do the work? So I was driving back from Vermont, which is a lovely drive, by the way. And I thought to myself, all right, what actually transpired? So a coach came to me, not a Scrum Master, not a product owner, not a developer, not a QA person, not a manager, but a fellow coach came to me and said, hey, I have this issue. So we've got this team and they're working on this one project. And then there's another project that's just got funded. And I'm thinking either we could let them finish up their current project and then take on this new project because it's kind of in the same area and they're already together. They've gone through forming and storming and norming. They're on their way to performing. So that seems like a good thing. And then this other person is suggesting that we spin up a new team. And they're thinking that to wait for the current team might put deadline pressure on the project, and spinning up a new team might mean we've got more resources. And I'm thinking that new team is going to have to go through, it's not a team that's new to the project. It's a brand new team. Spinning them up is going to have to go through forming, storming, norming, performing. So I think there's risk there. So I coached, so that was his example, and I'm not going to go through all the details, but basically I coached him through that process. And from a coaching perspective, I was, at the time patting myself on the back. Like I didn't tell him what to do. I gave some options, but I was very non-judgmental, very neutral, and I felt really good about it. So I'm driving home and I'm thinking, what's bugging me now? But the thing, as I was, figuratively writing down what I did, I realized that what I had done is, yes, I had coached him on how to make a decision for other people. I had not coached him on, it's a little meta, how to coach the people involved to, as a team, come up with a decision, as opposed to him saying, this is what we're going to do. And so for me, that was, I was like, oh, when coaching coaches, you have to remember, who's the eventual outcome here? Is it the coach and something, in their life, or are they going to then turn around and work with others? And in that case, in that particular case, it's a little meta. So I'll give you another example here, show you how this might work. So what actually transpired, you write down, so let's say you're an experienced Scrum Master comes to you and says, could you run the retrospective? I'd like to see how you do it. And then you just agree to run the retrospective. So that would be, if you're writing it down in retrospect, you'd say, I did the work. Now, it may have made sense to do that, but since you just said, yes, sure, I'll do it, you didn't get the context. So an alternative would be when they say, hey, can you run this retrospective, say, because they're experienced, say, that seems unexpected. What I could have done was say, that seems unexpected at this point, because you're an experienced Scrum Master. What's up? That would be a coaching mode. And being in coaching mode is a lot better than being in doing the work mode. So from the question of that seems unexpected at this point, what's up? The person might say, oh, nothing really. I just, I noticed that when you do a retrospective, it comes out differently, even if I use the same format, because, you suggested a couple formats and I ran through them and I got, a certain level of results, but then I was attending one of your retrospectives. Well, I wasn't, but I heard somebody else attended one of your retrospectives and it was the same format and it seemed like the results were better. And so it just seems like there's something different. So, oh, okay. So under those circumstances, sure, I'd be happy to, because I'm not doing it for you and just doing the work for you. You're looking for something in the way that I am doing that. You're thinking there's something that you can learn there. Okay, that makes sense. But without knowing that background, then I might be just doing the work. And the person was like, oh, I just didn't feel like doing it. And it's great to have you do it, whatever. So the technique is, after you've had coaching interaction, write down what you did, think about what mode it was, and then think in retrospect, could I have chosen a better mode? Right. So if we sort of accidentally gravitated to facilitating when we could have done teaching, or teaching when we could have done mentoring, or doing the work when we could have been coaching, or whatever. So I found that to be a very useful format. Okay. So, and now a word from our sponsor, and then we'll get to Q&A. So in case you haven't heard, I'm going to be doing some workshops coming up. There's one this weekend, actually, but registration is closed for that. Next week here in Woburn. And then we've got Dallas coming up and Toronto. And if you're not in any of these areas, you can reach out to me. We'll be starting to schedule workshops in other areas. So if you're interested in it coming to your area, just let me know. So, and it's only $9.95, which is awesome. It's introductory. Don't know how long that'll last, maybe sometime into next year. The competition is somewhere between $1,700 and $2,500. So it's a good deal. And it's unique in that it's 2 days of in-person. Most everybody else is 3 days, which is awesome, but being away from work for 3 days can be difficult, especially if you're traveling. And so this is 2 days in person, but there's some prep work, and then there's a half a day of virtual. You get a whole bunch of coaching tools, right? So the idea is, like, instead of going to a whole bunch of conferences, you can just come to this, and it's like going to a conference with 14 different, well, more than 14 sessions, a whole bunch of 1 hour sessions. It's one way to look at it. You get a deeper dive into coaching skills, a lot of the things we've talked about today and others. You get to practice, you get feedback from myself, any co-instructor that's with me, and other folks in the class. It's 2/3 of it is completely experiential. And you also get access to a coaching circle for ongoing development, and you get more details on Eventbrite. So without further ado, let's see if there's any questions on today's topics or really anything, and we'll go from there. I resemble the remark on time management. Yes. Well, I won't point out who that was, but I think I know what you're talking about. All right. So feel free to ask a question on anything. And, we don't have to use it the whole time here, but if you have a question, feel free to put it in the chat. Okay, so on ADKAR, could I go back and talk about the difference between reinforcement and support? Sure. It's not really a difference. I think it's really just the semantics. So to me, when I hear the word reinforcement, I hear something a little bit more militant, and that's not the intent there. It's more providing support. So being supportive of something, providing resources or leeway to do something, That's the intention there. I don't know if I completely covered that, so if there's a follow-up on that, feel free. Oh, another question. Is the Toronto class still on? Yes, it's just, this didn't get updated. So yes, there is a Toronto one, and on Eventbrite, you can see where things are and when they are and all that. All right, so maybe we'll hang out for a couple more minutes here and see if another question comes up. Oh yeah, right, there's no audio here, so just type in the chat the question. That was the intention, yes. Any advice for helping those that have been assigned a coach better understand coaching? And related, how to help an organization who considers coaches as experts transition? Oh, I'm chuckling because I hear that a lot. And actually, I was just doing this course, a course for an insurance company last week, and that question came up over and over again. And yeah, that's a tough one. So, all right. So the first part is advice for helping those that have been assigned a coach better understand coaching. I'm not sure how that's different than the second one, so I'll try to answer the second one. And if you want to follow up on elaborating on that question, feel free. So, oh yeah, they are kind of the same. All right, great. So how to help an organization who considers coaches as experts transition. So this is exactly what came up last week. So one of my pat answers to questions like that, there's a lot of questions sort of in that area that get the same answer, which is it takes time and patience. I think when you have an expectation that coaches are experts, getting folks to the understanding that there is value, like I talked about in the beginning, that there is value in coaching by itself, that takes time, because I think a lot of folks, right? When was the last time you hired a Java coach? I've never heard of a Java coach. Maybe there is one. Or a installing Windows 10 coach. So, you can imagine the Windows 10 coach is like, well, what do you think you should do? Like, install Windows 10, please. So it's not like a typical experience in the technical world, I would say. So to one extent, it's really just patience and time and showing the value of coaching. I think the other thing is also, so when I talk about coaching and being an expert and trying, not to just tell people what to do and not to be the expert, that it definitely takes time to share that. And so while you aspire to do coaching, you may start out with expert, right? So somebody comes to you and says, hey, I've got this problem. What is the correct way to solve it? Right, so right there, what is the correct way to solve it says there must be a correct way to solve it, because in the technical world, that's very often the case. There is a way to solve it. But if you think about writing code, for instance, while there's a particular way to do the syntax in Java, the exact way to solve a problem using Java, wow, there's all kinds of different ways, right? So I think it's the same thing with implementing Agile. There's not necessarily a right way to do it, and that's something that takes time. So, if somebody comes to you and says, what's the right way to solve it? You can say, well, I have a couple of different ways that I can see to solve that. Before we get to that, though, I'd like to back up and get some context. So right away, you want to disarm the person. So they're not like, oh, you're going to do the bobblehead coaching. How do I feel about it? What was my childhood like, and what do I think, right? So you've disarmed them. So context, who doesn't want to give you context? Oh, well, here's how it came about, and then this, and then that. And then you can ask some innocent questions in the beginning, like, okay, well, how did that come about? Right? So you can get some coaching in there, and then if they start to become impatient, then you could move to giving the expert advice. But at least you started to get people into that groove of, oh, I see. So they're going to want context first. They're going to want to understand, what have I tried? What are some of my ideas? But they're not going to withhold the advice. So I think that's one of the issues is if the person feels like you're going to withhold your advice, that they may walk away and try to find another expert. So that's kind of the basics of what I've got. Any follow up on that? Feel free to ask. Okay, so there's a question here on the self-retrospective. Was I saying that there's a right mode for every scenario? So let me clarify on that. I wasn't saying so much. Let me just actually back up to that slide. I wasn't saying so much that there's a right mode. So if you picked one mode, it was the wrong mode, you should have picked another one. I'm just saying, think about what mode did you use? And in retrospect, is there another mode you could have used that would have, I think actually this part that I left out, is there another mode that you could have used that would have helped the coachee do more on their own? Was there an opportunity to teach them something that they could then, make the decision on their own? Or if you went to coaching, actually were they not looking for a sounding board, right? So if you've got somebody in front of you that has never heard of other retrospective techniques, you can ask them open-ended, non-leading questions, all day long, and the likelihood that they're going to invent another retrospective technique is pretty low. So even coaching can be the wrong thing. So I was just saying, think about the mode you used. Was there another mode that would have, helped the other person move forward more on their Agile journey? That's all. Okay, and oh, good. Okay, got another one just popped in. Oh, no, sure, that's a good topic. So I was looking at changing widespread perception at an organization, deep, pervasive stuff, sometimes animosity to anyone with the title coach, that kind of thing. Wow. You're a coach, so I'm going to avoid you like the plague and tell you what you need to hear until you go away. Never heard that. Actually, I ran into that not too long ago where I don't know what happened, and I feel like there was some history there that I never got to. So, when you're brought into an organization as a coach, the entry into the organization isn't always, the best thing. Sometimes you don't even have a chance to influence that. The Agile Gestapo. Whoa. Yeah. So I'm guessing. So the person that's asking this and mentioning this, I know very well, and I know that they're not a Gestapo. So clearly that came from somewhere else. But anyway, so my experience was, I came into the engagement and I was at a meeting with the senior leadership, and there was this one person that would not look me in the eye. And I had never met him before, and there was no previous relationship. I can't think of anything. Maybe I dinged their car accidentally and didn't know about it. I don't know. But they said, why do we need this Agile leadership course? We don't really need some, so-called Agile expert coming in and reading from a book to us. And I was thinking, well, that's really not me, but that must have been somebody else. So in my experience, and normally, it's kind of a inconvenient medium here, but actually, we could follow up on this later, Phil. But I don't know the whole context here, which I would generally do. But it seems like there was some bad experience in the past, and maybe this is obvious, but just finding out what happened there might help address it. And just be you. I know that in this case you're a wonderful coach. Just keep being you, and either people will see that you're different, or they won't. And I think if they can't see the value that you provide, then they're missing out. One of the things I like to say is you can't save them all. There's not always a way through in a particular situation. Sometimes it's not gonna, that breakthrough isn't gonna happen until the third coach that comes in that is different than whatever the bad experience was that they had. You can't save them all, but if it is savable, I think just focusing on being yourself, doing everything that you would normally do, trying to find out more about what happened, and being understanding of the fact that they're pretty sensitive, it'll either work out or it won't. So I don't know that I have more there. And in the case that I was talking about, that person that had the bad experience, they moved on from having me as the enterprise coach, so they brought in team coaches, and that's actually going extremely well. So I wasn't able to save that situation, and I couldn't go back in time and undo the damage that had already been done. Okay, so with that, I think that's it, and then I hope to see you guys. Actually, next week there won't be a session, and I don't know if there'll be one the following week, but the intent here is to try to have it every week, maybe on Thursday, maybe not. We'll see what happens going forward. But this is the third one, and we're just getting going, and we'll have more. If you have any suggestions, feel free to reach out and let me know what topics you'd like to cover. So with that, I think we'll wrap up.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Damon.
Thank you, Ryan. And thank you, everybody that came.